Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Donovan, and today we're going to take a look at a device from a little bit of a lesser known company. This is from a company called Umidigi, and it's a little bit lesser known because up to this point you could only pick up their devices from Chinese websites. Well, the good news is they're now available on Amazon.com. So here's a list of the specs you're going to get here on the A3 Pro. It is a very budget-friendly device, and you can see that, like I said, it's available on Amazon.com right now for $99. But if you click here, you will see that it's actually available if you click on that coupon for $95. So it's available in two different colors. I have the space gray version, but it's also available in rose gold as well. And then we do also have two different configurations. So here we have the A3 and then the A3 Pro. So we're going to be unboxing the A3 Pro and take a quick first look at it. So the differences between these two, this one has a 5.5 inch display versus a 5.7 inch display, and notice that this one has no notch where the Umidigi A3 Pro does have the notch. And then this one comes with 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of internal storage versus 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of internal storage. So those are the main differences. On the back of the box, they list the specs, so we'll take a look at those real quick. So we have a MediaTek 6739 quad core. That's a A53 processor, so 4 cores of A53 clocked at 1.5 gigahertz. So that'd be similar to like the Snapdragon 425 if you're familiar with that processor. We have an pretty much vanilla version of Android 8.1 Oreo. We have 3 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of internal storage. We have dual nano SIM plus a micro SD card for expansion slot. We have a 3,300 milliamp hour battery. Already mentioned that display, 5.7 inch. That is a 720p display. On the back, we have dual 12 megapixel and 5 megapixel cameras, and then an 8 megapixel camera on the front. Then you can see here the LTE bands that it supports, so pretty much all of the main bands that you would need. Now notice that with T-Mobile you're not going to get band 66, so that's that newest one that they use with that 600 what is it, megahertz? Yeah, 600 megahertz. So that one's not available, but all the other major bands are. Chances are you're probably going to have no issues getting service with this on T-Mobile, AT&T, Cricket, etc. All right, so now that we've got the phone all unboxed, I want to go ahead and make a quick observation, especially about the build quality, and that is how similar it is to the build of the iPhone XS Max. So obviously more like a XS in terms of size. So this is my XS Max. This is the Umidigi A3 Pro. So if I had a regular XS, they'd be a lot more similar in terms of size, but they were definitely going for something that looks at least like an iPhone. Obviously not built to the same quality as what you get here, but still very similar in terms of the actual design. So difference here being, I believe this is probably more like anodized aluminum, whereas over here we have stainless steel on the XS Max. But other than that, definitely glass back, similar camera setup. Obviously the flash here is outside of the cameras, whereas here it's right in between them. But yeah, very similar in terms of the design. So there's our fingerprint sensor up here on the top. We don't have anything except a couple of antenna lines along the left-hand side, or I guess this is the left-hand side, yeah, we'll say the left. So that is our SIM tray. So with our SIM tray, we have dual nano SIM plus micro SD card SIM tray, which is cool. We have our headphone jack, so that's a one-up on the iPhone. Micro USB, we have our speaker down there at the bottom. We have our power button and volume rocker, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at this screen. So I do have a screen protector on it. You can see the screen protector is a little bit of a magnet there, and I'm trying to actually use the fingerprint sensor, so eventually it does work. But yeah, so the fingerprint sensor, definitely not super fast. Let's go ahead and try that again. And I did also set up facial recognition. So there is definitely a delay when it comes to the fingerprint sensor. Now let's go ahead and test out the facial recognition, which I've found to be a little bit faster so far. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so it's about the same, maybe. Neither of them are particularly quick in terms of getting the phone unlocked. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about performance on the Umidigi A3 Pro. Now, keep in mind that I've only had this for a few hours, so kind of take that with a grain of salt as we talk about this. So I've run the Geekbench 4 score. You can see here we got a single core score of 659, multi-core score of 1778. Coming down here, you can see we have 3 gigs of RAM. We're running that MediaTek 6739 processor. As I mentioned before, it's a quad-core processor clocked at 1.5 gigahertz. Now, what does that mean in day-to-day usage? Well, let's just go ahead and kind of scroll through my, what is this, my Google Now feed. You can see there's definitely some stutters in there. Actually, yeah, well, I thought I got stuck there for a second. Let's go ahead and go into this Apple earbuds review here, and it's going to load it, and no problems there. So Macworld, and everything's looking pretty good there. So day-to-day tasks, like if you're doing social media, you're probably going to be just fine. It's not going to be super fast, but a couple things worth note. So a few games that we've played on it so far. So my kids played some Disney Now, some Nick Jr. games, Star Wars Force Arena, and it handled all the basic ones pretty well. Star Wars Force Arena, a little bit more graphic intensive, a little bit more heavy graphics game. Definitely nothing on the level of like Fortnite or anything like that. But that game did stutter just a little bit. You'll definitely have some frame rate drops. But overall, I think in very simple day-to-day tasks, social media, watching video, watching YouTube, Netflix, things like that, it's going to do just fine. Where you're going to have trouble is when you're trying to play heavy-duty games that have a lot of graphics. So anyways, not so bad so far. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the software on the Umidigi A3 Pro and a couple observations I want to make about the software. Number one, this thing comes with pretty much zero bloatware when it comes to apps. I believe out of the box it was like maybe 20 apps at the most, and all of them were Google apps. Anything that you see here that's pretty much a non-Google app is something that I've added onto the device. Another thing worth mentioning here is that in the settings, again, it's pretty much just 100% stock Android 8.1 out of the box. So I'm going to go down here into the system. Now, I did have an update right out of the box, and I believe it was the October security patch. Yeah, so the October security patch. So they might be giving you some updates. Probably not expecting to get Android Oreo, or sorry, Android Pie out of this device, but at least we do have Android Oreo 8.1. So relatively recent software here. And then when it comes to the settings, you can see basically we just have one thing that's non-stock here. We have this overview home back option. And what that does is it allows you to have swipe up gestures. So notice that my software options went away. So what happens here is now I can swipe from the middle and it's going to go home. If I swipe over here on the right side from the bottom, it's going to go into our recent apps. And then a swipe over here from the left is going to be our back button. So really outside of that, everything else is 100% stock when it comes to the software. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the cameras on the Umidigi A3 Pro. And again, we have a 12 megapixel and 5 megapixel camera here on the rear. On the front, we have an 8 megapixel camera. And one area that I will say about all less expensive phones that tends to be an area that they lag behind the more expensive devices is the cameras. And that's really pretty much true here with this device as well. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the settings. So we do, of course, have flash. We have an HDR mode, so that's going to be for those lower light photos. It's going to bring in a little bit more light. When I come down here, you can see we have panorama, normal, and then depth of focus mode. So if I go in here into depth of focus, that's kind of like the equivalent of a portrait mode. On the more expensive devices, they just call it depth of focus. And then down here, we have a slider for that depth of focus. And one thing I will mention here is that basically the higher that number is, so if I go up here to like 10, it's just going to narrow the depth of focus. But really all it does is it narrows how small that circle is that's going to be into focus. And it doesn't really matter where you're pointing, it's just that circle is going to be in the middle. So it's not true depth of focus or depth of field here, or it's not sophisticated anyways when it comes to that depth of focus option. So we'll go back into, I believe, normal mode. Yeah, so go into normal. And then when we go over here, we have beauty mode. So that's just going to soften skin tones. And then over here, we also have our video mode. And if I go into video, I believe there is a way to get into the settings. Let's see if I can find that. So if I go in here, There it is. So if I go into the modes and then the setting options are over here, you can see we do have EIS, so that's electronic image stabilization, available. So it's cool that they have that. That's not very typical when it comes to cameras. But overall, so far, let's just take one quick photo just so you guys can get a quick idea of, let's go back into picture mode. We'll take a quick photo here, just see how fast it snaps. So it's actually pretty quick shutter. That's nice. That's one area where they kind of suffer oftentimes. Now this is on my desk where it's pretty lit up, but not too bad. Obviously this is just one quick photo, but I will say don't expect a whole lot from the cameras here, but you know, they'll be fine for your average user. Alright, so before we wrap up this video, I wanted to make a couple more quick observations. Number one, we have, again, a 3300 milliamp hour battery, and at this point I can't really speak to what the battery life is going to be like, but a 3300 milliamp hour battery isn't too bad at all for a phone of this size and with the specs that you get on it, especially at a $100 price point. So my expectation is you should get around 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, which is pretty standard. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is the swipe up gestures I really do like, by the way. But let's just go ahead and take a listen to the speaker, because that's one thing that we haven't addressed yet. So there is just one bottom firing speaker here. There is no speaker up on the top earpiece. But then of course we do have a headphone jack. It doesn't come with headphones, but of course you can plug in any 3.5 millimeter headphones that you might have sitting around. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the speaker. And I'm going to put it up to my microphone now. All right, so a couple observations about that. Number one, it does get fairly loud, so it'll be just fine for like phone calls. It's probably not the best sounding speaker I've ever heard, and obviously it's just a single bottom firing speaker. But overall, it's pretty useful, I would say, for what you get on this device. So anyways, quick look at the Umidigi A3 Pro. More to come on this device. Subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.